name's Adrian Cartland, the principal of Cartland Law and the creator of Alira, the artificially intelligent legal information research assistant. Today I'm going to talk to you about dishonesty by design. So today's topic arose when a staff member called me this morning and said, "I'm sorry, I'm sick." And said, "Do I need to submit a sick certificate?" And I said, "No, we don't use sick certificates here." And she says, "Why?" And I said, "Well, because they're dishonest by design." She says, "What do you mean by that?" Now, a sick certificate, anyone can go down to their doctor and say, "I feel bad, I feel terrible." It's very difficult for a doctor to conclusively find that a non-sick person isn't sick. Indeed, with any bit of cunning, the most able-bodied person could get a sick certificate at least for a couple of days. Now, maybe having a month off is going to be something difficult. You're going to need to show some more kind of chronic problem. But for a day or so, anyone can say that they're feeling terrible. And objectively, there isn't an external measure. And so a sick certificate has almost nil value in capturing someone who is cheating a system for a small amount of time. And unfortunately, it wastes hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer dollars in Medicare and in doctors' time, what they could otherwise use to treating legitimately sick people. And it also wastes the time that someone has on their day off. And if they are sick, they want to be taking a day off so they can recover. You don't want to spend half of that day sitting in a doctor's room who's going to give you a couple of aspirins and say, "Well, you probably got a flu and you're going to feel better in 2 or 3 days." It might encourage them to do something terrible like take antibiotics for their cold. And now, if someone is just, like, they're not physically sick, but they're just run down and they just need a day off, then you're wasting that time that they need to recover. So the policy that we have instead is that if you're not at 100%, just take the day off, or take the time off that you need to recover. Come back, like, we want you here working. And we want you to do everything that you can so that you can be in the best capacity possible. And if part of that is taking, a few hours off in an afternoon or coming in sick, that's fine. What you need is that commitment to the job. Now, this doesn't work with someone who's not committed to their job. If they don't want to be there, then perhaps you need some sticks rather than carrots. Or perhaps you need to change your workplace culture or change the design of the jobs that they're doing such that they do become committed to it. But so the idea of a sick certificate is dishonest by design. Now, it is encouraging people to have to go to the doctor and say, "Look, I'm feeling sick." Or maybe they just have they've got some mental health problems, and so then they need to lie to their doctor and say, "Oh, I've got a flu," so that they can get that sick certificate that the doctors write without thinking. Now, this is of more interest besides just a HR policy. There was a 2015 study by the Army War College in the US about how these systems in the US Army encouraged officers to be dishonest. Now let's take a step back. People who enlist in the military, and particularly officers, are highly honest by their nature. They're literally risking going into a profession where they may risk and give up their lives for the betterment of their country. That they're personality-wise, they generally have highly noble, altruistic people who want to achieve a goal and are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice to do so. So then how could you turn someone who is, kind of like your Superman or Clark Kent personality into the Lex Luthor, someone who might be dishonest? Now, I'm sure there's bad people in the military, but what we're looking at is how can you turn someone or encourage someone with who starts off like Clark Kent to go, "Now I'm going to be dishonest." And what they found was that it would start with mandatory training. they might have, say, 290 hours available in a year, or 290 days available in a year for training once you've taken away holidays, annual leave, weekends, etc. But they found that they had 40 days more training than there were days in the year. And then a couple of years later, they had over 200 days of training excess. So there was no possible way that someone could complete all of their requirements for training. And in particular, certain divisions had extremely large amounts of training. Now, all of the pieces of training that they were given, I'm sure had really good intentions, but it didn't consider what it might create as a system that would then encourage people to be dishonest. Some examples were given. An officer who was required to do sexual harassment training for his soldiers said, we don't have time, so I just told them, don't touch women. And then we ticked off the training. Another one had to do a quiz, and they had 9 people in their unit, and they just picked the smartest guy, and he did the quiz 9 times, and then therefore it had been ticked off on paper. Another example was an officer falsified a brain trauma report because he said that and said that one of his soldiers was, or one of his officers was too far away or further away from a blast that happened in a war zone, and so because he said that if I had told the truth, he would have had to do mandatory brain assessment and be taken away from the unit, in which case my unit would be left with no leadership, and then they're all going to come home in body bags. So it's not just just ticking off courses, it's serious requirements. Another one was that they had to, after each mission in Afghanistan, they would need to do a PowerPoint report on when they've had enemy contact. But of course this takes a couple of hours to prepare. So soldiers might reuse previous PowerPoints, which is obviously just not like providing no useful information, or just not submit it, or pretend that they've submitted it, or change the date on it. And in any event, a lot of this material was just going off into some head office somewhere because someone had come up with a requirement saying this is some useful information. Meanwhile, the soldiers are going, well, we're just going to make do. We're going to look for the underlying intent of things, and then try and meet our requirements as best as possible. Now, of course, this is what happens when there are rules, and there are too many rules to follow. People will break them, and they will go, they'll create a hierarchy of rules and say, well, what must I follow, what must I not? Now, once someone starts breaking rules, it's kind of like a gateway drug. I might say, well, now I might break another rule, I might break another one. And they're going to hold some set of moral values really highly. But if you're trying to say, I want to get people, I want to create an administrative system whereby I know that people will comply with these rules, then you're going to fail, because you're going to create too many rules for people to actually follow. So this creates dishonesty by design. And so the reason why this is of interest is when we're designing rules, designing systems, we need to think of how people will actually act. A classic example is when you see a footpath that goes around the edge of a park, and then you will see a worn path right through the middle of it. So someone has designed that people will walk across a park, but then instead people actually just cut across it. Now, if you were clever in your design, you would think through, what will my users do? Now, and then follow that. Now we see this in the startup world. People iterate quickly. You build something, build a minimum viable product, and then that will not work. And then you take your user experience and your customer feedback, and then let's iterate it again and change it, and change it based on what people are doing, so that it matches what they're doing. Instead of having a top-down approach where you say, I'm going to conceive of everything we might want to do and design it ahead of time. So instead of having to say and having to think of each problem and therefore deal with the knowledge problem that Hayek picked up, that no one can know all of the knowledge that the person on the ground has. When we're designing systems, we need to think about the problems in creating those rules, and the impossibility that we might have in creating those rules, in that there will be some problems in there, and then we're going to need to create some flexibility. Now, of course, if you then say, I'm going to create a punishment for someone who breaks this rule, what's going to happen is you're going to either A, enforce it entirely, and you're going to kick out 90% of the officers in the army, or alternatively, if you do create some punishments, again, that's another set of rules and that people would break. So, for example, the Army War College report found that there was systemic abuse of rules, and so, for example, there would be officers of different ranks have to have mandatory meetings each year to reflect upon things, and everyone would just sign off that it happened. So they're becoming complicit in breaking rules and understanding them. And again, so a culture of breaking rules leads to larger rules being broken. Now, I've thought about this in some own form, and some forms that I've had to fill out. All lawyers in at least South Australia need to fill out their mandatory CPD requirements. And I was struck at the similarity. Of you have to do 10 hours of CPD, continued professional development, every year, which is, of course, just like all of the Army War College things, is a worthwhile endeavor. We should all be doing this. Now, myself, I generally average 100 to 200 hours of CPD a year, so about 10 to 20 times what's required. This is, because I'm a tax lawyer, and that's very research intensive. I'm on a lot of committees and write papers, and I do a lot of lecturing, and so it's very easy to meet this. But of course, I need to swear that I have met this. This isn't just a bureaucratic form that I say, yes, I have done this. At the end of the CPD year, you must swear on oath that you have met this bureaucratic requirement. Now, what happens if someone's, sat in a lecture for 50 minutes rather than an hour? They're 10 minutes short. They've just lied. But they've not just lied, not just ticked some compliance box. They've now sworn, and as an officer of the court, if you, as a solicitor, if you lie on something that you swear, like that is something that you get struck off for, because it shows that you're unfit to practice as a lawyer. Why would you be struck off for lying? Because once you get caught lying, it is likely that you'll be lying elsewhere, and therefore you might lie on the things that are really important. And of course, why is it important to be able to swear things on oath? It's really important if you wanted to present evidence to the court, and as your solicitor, and you swear the veracity of it, or make oaths, or somebody is a witness and they're going to present evidence. Our legal system relies on someone being honest at that time. That is of utmost importance. But we can't then say, if someone swears an oath, they must tell the truth. And then extrapolate that to, we must make someone swear an oath on every time I want someone to complete something. Because this, swearing an oath in court for adducing evidence is similar to a military personnel's utmost goal of defending the country. And saying, we're going to prioritize that above anything else. And so, well, cut out their, random pieces of training that they have to do and say, well, no, we're going to practice on our field training. So therefore, if we have to get into combat, we actually know how to shoot people and not get shot ourselves. Similarly, there is a hierarchy of things that a solicitor must do. They've got work to do. They've got court deadlines, and then when you start slipping oaths into what is a bureaucratic requirement, I mean, it's not fundamental to the system. 5 years ago, there wasn't CPD requirements, and there was not utter chaos in the entire legal system. So it wasn't broken before. Now maybe it improves things. Yes, people should totally be continually training and upgrading themselves. That's a motherhood statement. It's something we can always all agree with. But why must someone swear on oath? What happens is that what happens if they haven't? You're going to start they haven't completed their requirements, but they must tick that off, otherwise they don't get their practicing certificate, they must swear it. Therefore, there will be a non-zero amount of solicitors who will falsely declare on oath that they have completed that. Perhaps even mistakenly, they've just made a mistake and miscounted or misunderstood the requirements. But then that is the gateway to further dishonesty and further lying. So in that tiny little piece, we can see a system which is encouraging dishonesty, which is perhaps one of the worst things we could do. A dishonest solicitor is 10 times or 100 times worse than a solicitor who has not completed their mandatory CPD. Another example. Every time you need to submit a tax return or a statement on behalf of a client to the taxation office, you must swear that this is correct. You must swear that all of the material in it is correct. Now, that's just the way the forms are done. And there's certain requirements in the Tax Administration Act that require you to swear an oath. It doesn't actually say exactly the words. The tax office encourages particular words and makes it very difficult if you're using their electronic lodgement services to not have to swear that. But the problem is that what happens if there is a mistake? Now, there are many good reasons why someone might legitimately make a mistake in their tax returns. They could have just miscalculated something. They could have incorrectly claimed a deduction. We know this because there is a huge system set up bureaucratically to deal with mistakes, audit, find them, deal with objections, deal with appeals. I mean, it's what I do for a living as a tax lawyer. So a tax dispute starts with there is some misunderstanding or dispute as to whether something is correct or not. But the problem is if you have declared that the facts in something are correct, then if it's later found by a court, for example, which is the more proper arbiter of whether something is correct or not, if you have declared that something is correct and it is in fact not, then haven't you lied on oath? Now, what I do as a solicitor to get around this is every time I lodge an objection for a client, I will change the oath that I need to give, such that it says that I declare that the contents of this are true and correct to the best of my instructions. So it's like, well, maybe my client's lied and instructed me wrong. It's like, well, that's fine. Now, ultimately, that's the best I can do. Like, if a client tells me, gives me wrong information, I can't make it any better. So again, this is another example of creating dishonesty by design, and it's creating a risk for any solicitor, for example, who needs to submit something to the tax office and swears an oath. What happens if later down the track they are found to be incorrect? Could they be and have in their material that they have submitted, and therefore have lied on oath and therefore be potentially struck off? So we should get back to the proper use of oaths. The proper use of them is where there is something fundamentally important. For other things, we should just have a tick box, like for example, I am submitting these requirements. Like it is ticked off. It is not have to swear to them, or give people the opportunity to decide which requirement. Like set them a goal. This is what you need to achieve. If you're in the army, you need to achieve combat readiness above all else, and then make all of the other requirements potentially optional. And you might say, but what about this training that we do? This is so important. But is it as important as your number one goal? Now, and how much you do that in the system? One example that I like in the system that encourages the ownership and responsibility is in Toyota. In a Toyota factory line, anyone in the line, from the general manager to the site manager to the worker on the line to the floor sweeper, can stop the entire production line. They can stop, potentially causing millions of dollars worth of delay and halt. And they can do this because if you see a problem, you each have responsibility for it, and you can say, there is something, and I think we need to stop this whole production line so that this doesn't continue up. And because the overriding goal is to produce cars at an efficient and reliable and safe manner, and without having problems, and so you empower people and say, here is our goal. You can do whatever it takes to work towards this goal. As another example, I say to my staff, if you think that I'm wrong in some tax advice, like, you tell me. Now, and we'll stop and we'll go through and explain why you're not right, why I'm right. The reason is because 95% of the time I'm right, and because I'm obviously more experienced than my junior solicitors. But 5% of the time I'm wrong, and we stop something terrible from going out. So what you might do if you're designing a system whereby you say that we need these particular requirements, make them subservient to an overall system. So if you want to say lawyers, you need to do some CPD, instead of saying that, just make it like filing your ABN. Like, you need to do this, and you're going to get warnings, and but not have to swear it on oath. And if you've got a whole bunch of mandatory training requirements, make it subject to some kind of overall fuzzy readiness to achieve your overall goal, be it combat readiness or appearing in court. We don't want to create systems that encourage good people who are otherwise well-intentioned and honest to act in a dishonest manner. Instead, we want people to act in a way that achieves the overall noble goals that we have. And it might mean that we're going to have to not tick a whole bunch of boxes. Instead, we might empower people to take responsibility and go, you should do all of the things that you need to do to meet that overall goal. Thank you very much.